Welcome to the Disability Sport Info Show, the podcast that explores academic knowledge about disability sport. My name is Dr. Chris Brown, and I'm an academic with an expertise in disability sport. Each episode, I focus on a specific topic of disability sport and speak to academic experts to understand the area in more depth. So, join me and listen to the Disability Sport Info Show to get an expert view on disability sport. Hello listener, welcome to the Disability Sport Info Show. This episode focuses on the sport spectatorship experiences of disabled sport fans. I'm delighted to welcome Owain Davies from Level Playing Field to the show, who will discuss the upcoming Unite for Access campaign. Level Playing Field is a national charity that campaigns for greater inclusivity and accessibility for live sport events for disabled people in the UK. Owain, welcome to the show. Great to have you with me. For listeners who aren't aware, who is Level Playing Field and what are the aims as an organisation?
Firstly, thank you, Chris, for having me on. It's a great opportunity to talk about a subject which we feel is absolutely fundamentally important, and it's something that we're pleased to be able to work in with yourself to be able to kind of obviously elevate that. So a level playing field, who are we and what are our aims really? I suppose maybe to start that, if I just kind of go back to the origins of level playing field, and we started possibly about 20 years ago, it kind of it started quite organically with about five fans or so, disabled fans sat around a kitchen table discussing the inequality of experience and about what they could come together to do to make those changes. And in essence, that kind of sentiment, that key value that started the charity is strong today. It's evolved, and obviously the charity has grown, and we're pleased with that because the topic is important and it needs that greater level of platform. So our aim really is to represent the views of disabled sports fans, the real life match day experience, that we can be a mouthpiece for what's happening to them in every facet of attending live sport, from booking a ticket to getting to the ground to being in the ground and the experiences that they do have, and to channel that into some key pieces of information that clubs can use to improve the matchday experience. But equally more so now is to celebrate good things that are happening as well. And I think that's really important that we want to do, is to establish that culture towards access and inclusion where people are working together to make a change and a difference, and not doing it because they're fearful for it, that they see it as an opportunity to bring people together, to represent the community that the clubs and the stadiums serve, and to be able to ensure that everyone can enjoy watching the beautiful game, and particularly in football and also in other sports. That's possibly something else that we should mention, that as a charity, we also work across England and Wales primarily, and across all sports as well. Largely, probably most of our work is in football, where it's a part of our funding streams that kind of come from and our origins. But yeah, that's kind of primarily kind of what the organisations and our aims are.
Great. So you mentioned it was founded about 20 odd years ago by a group of fans because of the inequality of experiences that they felt they had when they were watching live sport, primarily football, I think, in terms of the founding.
That's right.
Members. So how would you describe the current experiences of disabled fans attending live sport matches? And if we think about when the organisation was founded to now, how much progress has been made?
So the current experience of fans, I think, one of the biggest catalysts for change in recent times has been undoubtedly the Premier League pledge. So back in 2015, just for people who are unaware of it, the Premier League pledged to that all their stadiums within a 2-year window, so by 2017, would meet accessible stadia. So accessible stadia is the guidance documents that venue use to ensure that their stadium is accessible for disabled sports fans. So that was a huge catalyst, not just in the Premier League, it kind of done through the EFL and into other sports. The spotlight was well and truly on. The Equality and Human Rights Commission were involved, and they drove the standards. We saw new services coming online, the birth of the sensory rooms, and I think that it's been a real positive change for that. Progress has undoubtedly been made, but it's that kind of having that consistent element. It was demonstrated what gets measured gets done. Now, there were still some elements of it that still needed to be went past the 2-year window, but from a point of, was there progress made? Yes, there was. Is there still more to be done? Yes, and there's still a lot to be done, but we need to recognise what progress has been done. What can we learn from that to then reevaluate and to kind of go again? in this kind of current time, what's kind of the improvements we've seen? There's a greater prevalence on underrepresented disabilities. And I think the kind of the not more so the non-visible disabilities around sensory ones such as autism and other, and maybe kind of around Crohn's and colitis, and what services and reasonable adjustments we need to be providing to make that match day more inclusive for a fan. So those are the kind of the experiences that we have seen and seen the improvement. If we're looking at some of the barriers, there's a lot of them are still the same. There's still a lot of old stadiums there, and changes to those older stadiums are hard. It doesn't mean that we can't do it. It means we need to think harder. We need to allocate more time to it, and we need to not necessarily not kind of put it to one corner and we'll unbox it when we're maybe got a bit more thinking space and more time to do it. It needs to be brought online, and plans to make that match day more inclusive needs to be always ongoing. So that consistency to access is something that we need to kind of really ensure that's at the heart of any kind of future change. And I think that's where we may see some of the challenges, that the consistency between maybe club to club in leagues or maybe in regions. Those are the kind of the barriers that we're facing and that fans are experiencing. One of the things following some of our surveys that fans are really kind of mentioned is maybe traveling to venues. And I think that when we take a step away from the initial ground, is how do you get there? At the supported journey physically from door to stadium is very difficult. Public transport is an issue that, when you've got thousands of fans going on the train to wherever it particularly may be to watch your team, the services that are provided for disabled fans sometimes can be suspended, and that is a barrier. But then also, if you go back another step, is about when you buy a ticket online, is that always available for disabled fans? And I think, where we have seen progress, we need to celebrate it, but there are still areas that we need to catch up on, and that would be kind of our important side that we need to kind of really focus and zero in on.
Okay, and you mentioned about how, so there are old stadiums, obviously some new ones, but some old ones, of course. So what are the experiences or challenges that are involved with some of the old stadiums for fans?
It'd be very varying, but, I suppose, a few of them would be sightlines. I think traditionally in the past, if we're using wheelchair user spaces, viewing areas, primarily back when maybe stadiums initially built in, early 90s or, late 80s, there might be all pitch side viewing areas where disabled fans and wheelchair users in particular in this point want to have choice. Some people want to sit pitch side, like you may have a differing point. You might want to sit pitch side, and I might want to sit, high at the back of the stadium, and because that's how individually you want to experience the game. That's no different to any disabled person. I think having choice at the centre is important. So to view sightlines is one element of it. As I said, services and provisions for fans with maybe non-visible disabilities. That's another kind of factor. So maybe sensory rooms or sensory packs, or greater level of awareness of booking tickets in maybe quieter areas of the stadium or end of aisles. Having that flexibility is important as well. And then also, if you look at it, audio descriptive commentary, if you're blind or partially sighted, for a fan who might require extra level of detail if they're blind or partially sighted to experience or watch the game, that service sometimes can be, you're restricted to one particular area. And actually, you want choice. You want to be able to sit, elsewhere in the stadium with your fans. The other side is that maybe we've seen is that wheelchair users, for example, if you're an away fan, maybe sat with home fans and are completely away from your away fans, which is really intimidating as well as a part of that. So that's another factor. There's only a handful of clubs still certainly in the top 4 divisions in football that have that, and that's something that we're really keen to see the end of. That that away fans can sit with away fans. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, and I suppose for listeners who aren't aware or don't know huge amounts about this area, the idea that you don't have segregation throughout the ground for all people, so certainly for football, I know other sports it might be slightly different, but for football, that's quite shocking, I think, for some people, because we have segregation for a reason. The idea that it's okay to have away fans in the home end seems a bit extraordinary that this still happens in this day and age, especially with the passion and the tribal nature of football. And I suppose for the fans who are in the home end, they're not necessarily feeling very confident to show their club colours, maybe. how do the fans experience it when they are put in the home end as an away fan?
We've had reports of whether it's been abuse in the past. That's one real experience where it kind of happens. And I think, like you go back to the point that segregation in football might be for safety, and that kind of experience, but also as well, there's a sense of when you go to an away game, there's a different kind of mentality as well, that you're going collectively together. You're almost going into the lion's den, as it were, and you're as a band of brothers and sisters going to watch your game and to experience and to enjoy that. And then you do all of that. You go on the coaches together. You travel, hundreds of miles sometimes, and then maybe depending on which ground you're going to, you actually say, all right, okay, all the away fans go to this end. Apart from you, 7, 10, 15, 20 people, you're going to sit at the completely other end of the stadium, and you're now going to experience football where it's possibly a sanitized version, in the sense that you don't want to cheer or to wave or to go too passionate when your team score, or if it's or frustrated when they lose, because what will that bring on to you as an individual? And I think it's something that we really need to recognize, that it can't happen in 2023. And it's something that any club that does have that needs to be urged to, that change needs to happen quite quickly. And that's obviously something we're really focusing in on as a charity, and wanting to make that change, working with governing bodies and clubs about making that intervention as well.
No, definitely. And I think it's a great point you made about the community aspect. You have that collective identity amongst the away fans and just the fan base in general. Then suddenly it is disaggregated away for one set of fans versus the other, and that bond is severed because of access issues, isn't it, really? And that's obviously something that needs to be worked on.
It's absolutely right. We raise that this happens in football, but it's important equally that we provide the balance to it as well, that there's 6 or 7 clubs who do this out of the 92 who are in the kind of the top four divisions. So it's important that we kind of recognize that as well. And one of the points I probably should have made at the beginning as well, is that the importance of live sport. And I think in the realm of disability, watching football and live sport is possibly one of the most truly inclusive experiences, in the sense that everyone is watching the same thing, everyone's experiencing the same thing, granted through different lenses about how you watch sport, but you wear the same shirt, you consume the game to a certain extent in a similar kind of way, as opposed to if you look in the other disability. If you're looking at participation levels, for example, it's very much segregated, that you're working, you might be working in specific disability teams or, whatever it is, but watching it's the whole community kind of comes together. And that's something that we need to really celebrate, and to really make sure that it's at the heart of any messaging when we talk about the importance of watching live sport. It's more than just the 90 minutes. It's people coming together who may not mix in their circles, and that, we know that diversity makes the world a better place. It's reflective of the society we live in.
Great. And obviously, like you said, it's important to have that balanced perspective. 6 or 7 clubs, it's still not great, but of course, compared to the 92, that it's a lot more progress that has been made. Yeah. So that's a good point to have made. In terms of the ability of fans to be able to have a truly accessible and inclusive experience when attending live sport, how does it vary across the country? Is it due to the club resources, or is it geography, or is it other factors? Why would it be different maybe for some people in one part of the country versus another?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and the short answer is there's loads of factors to kind of why they're doing it. So I think if you look at inclusion, and some people will kind of say, well, inclusion's inclusion at the end of the day, you should just have to, it's about a mindset. And yes, in large part, that is an element. But when it comes to disability, there's something which sets it apart from a lot of other protected characteristics. And that is the financial infrastructure that's required for clubs to bring their facilities to the required standard for disabled people to be able to just get into the venue and to also experience it as well. And that can be very costly. There are some low cost or no cost opportunities to doing it, but there are some significant increases because, following the birth of the Disability Discrimination Act and then now the Equality Act. Before that, obviously, venues had really poor facilities and services. The legislation didn't manage that provision and that expectation. Now it does. And there's probably some arguments that the Equality Act is a little bit hazy and maybe could do with a bit more tightening up and a bit more teeth. But obviously it provides with a certain level of awareness and rights that we can hold a greater level of accountability. With that in mind, they also now venues need to kind of repair the kind of their stadiums to make it more inclusive, because when they were built, that legislation necessarily wasn't there. And so there's firstly that financial element. So there is the cost one. So obviously if you have a greater budget, then you have a greater element to spend to be able to make the changes. That's one side. But there are lots of alternative ways to be able to achieve similar levels of access with a lower budget. So it's not an excuse to hide behind that, or I don't have the money to be able to do it. We still need to be inclusive and provide those reasonable adjustments. The regional discussion, that's a really interesting point, because some people might say, well, in London, there's loads of accessible, there's trains, there's tubes, there's everything. But I think I'm not entirely sure of the stat, but I think it's something around only quarter of the underground might be accessible. And I'm not the exact stat, but that's obviously pretty shocking. When you think of like buses, there's only two or three spaces for a wheelchair user to go onto the bus. But if that's already taken up, we've heard experiences where wheelchair users at a bus stop waiting for the bus, it's empty, but then there's somebody, maybe a pram or maybe actually a wheelchair user in there, and the bus just drives on by, and that's it. So that's another element and a barrier kind of getting to the game as well. So but one of the ones as well is the attitude of the governance of the game. So if it's prioritized at the top, then change will happen. And that's where the greatest level of success is, that if it's maybe discussed at board level or certainly at chief executive level, and then that cascades down, then that's a real driver for change. And I think, with the fan-led review that's been going in, that's something that we'd really want to see is at the heart of that, is about how does the governance of the game preserve this opportunity for fans to be included and to ensure that's there. And I think that's a real cornerstone of any progress and development in this area, is that. Because instead of it kind of maybe landing on one person's shoulder, let's say the disability access officer at the club or the liaison officer in the club, and they are charged with doing everything, it needs to be owned by everyone in the organisation. That disability access officer is almost a conductor in that sense, kind of telling people that this is what we need to do in hospitality, more inclusive. So media and comms, this is what we need to do, these principles, and be able to drive that culture across the whole organisation.
Some really interesting points. And I just wanted to, before we kind of go on to the next point, when we talk about accessibility, it obviously varies as well for the individual. Accessibility for someone in a wheelchair could be quite different from someone who has visual impairment or who is colorblind or has a neurodivergent condition. So accessibility is not just a pre-packaged set of ideals or things that you can give to an individual. It has to be, of course, tailored and considered with the individual in mind. But also, when you were saying about the fan-led review, and you mentioned earlier at the beginning how the Premier League pledge really kind of moved the dial, I think, in terms of, the Premier League clubs getting involved, because it was a requirement, right? And it was being measured. So with the prospect of the independent regulator, what would you like to see introduced and implemented from the regulator to ensure more accessible and inclusive experiences for disabled fans?
So it's a great question. It's kind of obviously something that we kind of lend a lot of thought, and kind of we fed back into the report. And I think when the initial report came out, obviously we were pleased that there were some elements around it, but it was disappointingly thin. I thought, the initial thought from our perspective in regards to disability, and I think that, I suppose when we look at it, there's got to be engagement as first point. There's got to be engagement with fans and certainly experts within that particular field around the services that you provide. To the point that you made before, is that about not just the spectrum of disability is broad, but then when you go to each level, there's an adage in autism, is that once you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And the access requirements just within autism is so unique to the individual that you need to have that flexible approach. So if you kind of go with this one-size-fits-all solution, it's not going to work. And it falls into that medical model of disability. We follow the social model of disability. It's down to the society to create the adaptations to ensure that they're inclusive. But you can only do that by that engagement and recognizing kind of what's good. But so if we're looking at the kind of the white paper or the governance of the game, what do we want? We want that engagement, but we want meaningful engagement, not tokenistic engagement. That how does that, when you engage with the fans and you talk about this, how do you ensure that it's reflective of all the, of all disabled fans, that it takes all those points, and then what do you do with that information? It's not just listening and then we'll put it to the side until the next meeting or the next round table or the next level of engagement. What's the meaningful nature of that? And I think that's really important side, that we have to do that. Then the governance of it is that there's board champions, for disability or, access and inclusion within at board level. That is discussed, that there are twice a year, for example, it might be more, would be better that access and inclusion is discussed at board level, that there is appropriate budgets agreed to ensure that the club can deliver their access and inclusion obligations under the Equality Act, the legal obligations, the moral obligations, I think is also really important. Like we go back to the initial point I said, that we can't fear people into wanting to be inclusive. We want to ensure that people are doing it for the right reason, for the sense of community that football clubs and sports clubs are. It's the community, it's the hub of the community for a lot of people. And I think that's an important side that we have into that. And obviously learning from what we've seen in the past is what gets measured gets done, that there are a set of measurable standards that clubs can achieve, that they are measured against. In the utopia kind of world that we'd like to see is that there is a safety license at venues that clubs do have. And if you don't meet your safety license, then you don't open. It should be kind of similar kind of vein from access, and inclusion as well, is that would be the kind of the ideal position, is that power is almost taken out of the club's hand, that we need to meet this to be open, for business. And I think that's a really important side that we need.
Watch a space in terms of the independent regulator may take a few months, years, who knows, with the independent regulator coming in. So, it'd be interesting to see the progress on that. So one more question before we actually go to the topic that you're here to discuss. I know we've had a nice big conversation before the campaign discussion, but I'd just like to give you space to highlight some best practice that you've seen from all sports. So we've talked pretty much about football so far, but are there best practice examples that you'd like to share about inclusion and accessibility for disabled fans across sports?
There's a lot of good practice that happens out there, and the clubs that have the consultation with their fans, whether it's through disabled supporters associations, which are there's over 50 across the UK. Not every single club has one, but most clubs do have them. So engaging with disabled supporters associations about the proactive changes, I think that's a really good way of doing that. Instead of kind of having a conversation of kind of going, this is what we're doing, we're just updating you. We're not necessarily doing it from there. It's that the clubs at the beginning phase, if they're doing a redevelopment, if they're installing a sensory room, for example, they go out and they ask the questions first, that they really kind of considerate about those responses and bringing that in. And there's loads of clubs who do that, whether it's around their stadium developments, service implementation. So that's kind of one side as well. People then kind of having, reviewing their facilities. So having access audits and facilities around, recognizing against industry standards with experts. So somebody comes in, reviews their facilities and gets that understanding of where they are, warts and all. This is the state of play in our venue. This is how we measure against the kind of legislation, good practice and expectations. And then using that information from that report to put a strategy in play. Having a strategy which is that, yes, okay, we own this. This is our venue. We know it's not right. This is how we're going to get to this destination. Sometimes clubs are the innovators when we're kind of delivering reasonable adjustments. I don't want to kind of necessarily get it wrong, but Watford, one of the first venues to have their sensory room in place to do this. Obviously, a lot of campaigning work went ahead before that, but they put this venue in place and was very pioneering to a certain extent of putting this provision. An incredible space for families to be able to go and experience a game, and then using to transition into kind of season ticket holders in the stands as well. So there's some really good examples of what clubs do there, and on a grand level, but also on a supporter by supporter level as well.
Excellent. Right. Well, let's focus on the actual substance of the conversation now. So. Yes. Level Playing Field launching the Unite for Access campaign. So that runs from Saturday 25th of February to Sunday 12th of March. So what is the campaign? And we've kind of talked already about why it's needed, but why a specific focus for that particular period of time?
The campaign has been running well over 15 years now. Previously, or previous to this year, it's had a name change, and in the team, I get fined every time I say it incorrectly. So previously was Weeks of Action. I won't get fined for that because I've already mentioned it. But but now it's so we've moved on to the Unite for Access, and the whole purpose of the campaign is to celebrate the importance of access. How important access is to fans and to disabled fans, so to hear from fans about their experiences, why it's important, to celebrate what clubs do well in delivering that, so that we can inspire other clubs and to share good practices as well, but also to kind of to draw more people to the game. Some disabled people may see going to watch live sport as too difficult, too challenging. They may have lots of other perceptions and barriers. So it's kind of maybe dispelling some of those barriers, or certainly kind of giving a true reflection of that, so more people can enjoy live sport in their particular local community. So it's just a real big period of celebration, so that we can kind of harness the power of going to watch live sport. Why is it important? And that we can then kind of demonstrate what clubs do to deliver this. This year in particular is that we're really focusing on the I was there moment, whatever it is, when your team got promoted for the first time to the Premier League in, whatever year, or, what that particularly means. I was there for my grandson's first game, or I was there when we got relegated, whatever it particularly is, whatever is a really important memory and moment for fans, that I was there moment is afforded to disabled fans. And I think that's something that we really want to do, is to celebrate what was your I was there moment that you really enjoyed and experienced, and how did your club facilitate that? For some people it might be really simple, as a welcoming environment, taking time, offering support, patience, whatever it particularly may be. For some people it might be about the physical infrastructure, but also as well as recognizing this year, the name is Unite for Access. It's a recognition that it's not just down to one small cross-section of society, or I say small, so over 14 million disabled people in the UK, and the largest minority group in any population. Creating an inclusive environment is owned by everybody, and it directly impact individuals now, whether it's a family member with a disability or that person with a disability, but it could impact you later in life. As we know, disability is more prevalent with age. But excluding those important factors, we need to ensure as a community that our community is reflective. And that's where everyone owns creating an inclusive environment. And I think that's really important, that we harness that message. And it's not necessarily being, ignorant to that point. It's about understanding. And if you don't understand it, come and engage, speak to people, ask kind of questions. How can we support? What can I do to be more inclusive within your particular match day? And hopefully this is what this campaign does. It kind of puts the spotlight on a really important topic that we have seen progress, but there's a heck of a lot more still to be done.
Excellent. And how will that message be promoted? So how will the casual viewer be able to understand that this campaign is happening?
Across that 2-week period, 3 weekends, 2 weeks, our social media will be very, very busy. So at LPF tweets, search Level Playing Field on Facebook, and Level Playing Field UK on Instagram, and then also the Level Playing Field website. All that information will be there. We'll be tweeting as we go, liking as we like, and everything in between. We've had clubs signing up to the campaign since before Christmas. We're absolutely inundated. Clubs across the leagues have really bought into the campaign previously, and in particular with the name change as well. You might have some clubs who will be showing the support through awareness, raising awareness with players representing the campaign with wearing T-shirts, and then obviously some social media activity and some comms. We've got clubs who will be doing some awareness raising themselves about the facilities they provide and why it's important, and spotlighting on some fans as well. We've got Disabled Supporters Association back in the campaign, again, by engaging with their members and about how important watching live sport is for them, maybe checking in on their I was there moment as well. So a real diverse way of doing it. And, we often talk about what's the most important part of the campaign. Is it about the awareness, of players kind of elevating the profile? I think it's everything. And I think that's where it works really well, when you have the diverse element of players supporting it, and obviously bringing in maybe people who are not in the kind of disability world, as it were. Disability might not be a factor in their life at the moment. but it raises awareness in that cross section for fellow fans, that they can reach out and to share experiences with other fans because someone's shared their match day experience, and that's obviously a really important side as well. So there's a lot of diverse work there, and there might be some clubs launching new facilities as a part of this as well. One thing that we saw, which was really powerful last year, clubs did a pledge for the next 12 months we'll be focusing on this. I think that's a really powerful one that we really like to build on year, is that the pledge towards access and inclusion.
And what role will the broadcasters have? Because I know, when we have campaigns from Kick It Out about racism, or we have the rainbow laces, or sometimes you see on the broadcasters when they're like Sky Sports, for example, they'll have like the rainbow colours pop up on the kind of scoreline bit. Is there anything that the broadcasters will specifically be doing to support the campaign?
And I think it's a really good question. At the moment, there isn't really, and I think that's probably a broader question. And we spoke probably just before we started this conversation about how we kind of create a message of that broader awareness of inclusion. Sometimes there's a greater level of focus of individual protected characteristics, and I think we need that broad understanding that we need to work collectively to be able to drive those. So at the moment, broadcasters, they'll be picking up news stories and they'll be sharing certain elements maybe of what clubs are doing, but that kind of concentrated focus maybe from major broadcasters kind of supporting the campaign in that fashion isn't necessarily there yet, despite the fact that it's the largest minority group in any population. So more needs to be done within the kind of the media, and it's understanding why that's not the case at the moment. And I think that's something that we're seeing greater level of awareness in the media of disability related issues in sport, but we need more. We've seen obviously the negative impact of the Champions League final, and particularly about that side of things for disabled fans, and I think that's something that we need to really recognise to make bigger strides. That is a weak spot at the moment that we need to do more in. What we do have a lot of support is that the governing bodies, in where they did it last year, we saw at the Carabao Cup final, and there'll be more activity this Carabao Cup final as well, but we saw a BSL interpreter sign the national anthem before the final for the first time in supporting the campaign, and that will happen again this year. So there's some really elements such as that the media are picking up, but that concentrated effort and raising awareness on that is something that obviously there's a good opportunity for any media kind of organisation to pick up on.
Well, let's hope the broadcasters pick up the baton, if not this year, certainly in the years to come. Okay, and so for listeners, if they want to get involved and support the campaign, how can they do that?
Firstly is to kind of get in touch with Level Playing Field. You can, whether it directly with us via our email address, info@levelplayingfield.org.uk, or just visit our website. If you Google search Level Playing Field, you'll be able to find our website, and all the information is on there and on social media. You can check in with us and find out what your club's doing, and then you can support. We can point you in that direction with their activity. But mainly is sharing the kind of the content of work so that it gets out there to a broader audience. Because the more that we know and collectively know, and the more we share that message, the greater level of awareness that we'll have as well, and it will support that kind of movement towards that organic attitude to access and inclusion. That's something that's not forced, it just happens, and that's what we're trying to get to, is that there. So I think that'd be a really good way, is that listeners can kind of get involved with sharing our content on social media, reaching out if you're kind of got any questions as well, directly to us. We're always really keen to be able to engage with people to talk about this subject, and to see also if there's anything specific within your local community that we can assist you with as well.
This is a fantastic campaign, but how do you know whether it actually makes a difference, and how do you measure? So how do we actually attach action to this campaign?
So it's a really interesting. I think when we look at this in particular, is it making a difference, or how are we seeing progress? We're probably seeing progress because more people are signing up to the campaign. So whether it's from a club level, there's that buy-in, and the fact that if we're seeing clubs signing up to the campaign and saying we're celebrating Unite for Access, or previously, in the previous name of the campaign, we were celebrating this and sharing this, it instantly, to any disabled fan in the local community, shows that the club's committed and bought into that. So that's kind of, I suppose, that's the softer link into an academic's perspective. But we recently, and one of the biggest strength points we've seen is through our annual fan survey. This is the second year that we've done it, and the both years that we've seen over 1,000 fans take part in it. And I think evidently it is that eventually that we're going to see the progress through that is that are we seeing the match day experience improve for disabled fans? Are we seeing reductions in the attitudes that disabled people see around going to a match day? You know, some of the stats we saw in the previous one that we'd seen, the first year obviously showed our baseline results. We saw in the second year we had, growth in certain areas. If we're going to see the progress, it's we've also got to see it that it's not just, this is one key area of the whole of Level Playing Field's activity. There's also, once this campaign goes, is then the focus is that obviously using information to be able to shape services at clubs, learning about maybe the common problems that we see and then shaping that in, and through that way. So, it serves its purpose of raising the profile of disability, that more people are talking about it. And then, we need to then use our annual fan survey, which we're really proud that we've got a really good response rate to that data, but also it allows us to kind of measure the success of, I suppose, all of our work, but obviously which Unite for Access leads into the campaign.
Nice sidestep in terms of not naming the previous campaign. I suppose as a rugby fan, you appreciate that reference.
Absolutely.
Well done for that. Now, I'm conscious of time because we've had a really interesting discussion, but you're a very busy man. So I'll just bring it to a close with just a few more questions, if that's okay. Yeah. So if we're here in a year's time, what do you hope to have realistically achieved for disabled sports fans?
It's a really difficult and kind of with the sense that we've said of how broad disability is. But I think that what we want to see is a greater level of understanding, especially for underrepresented disabilities. And I think that's a really important side that we have that, because whether it's people who might have Crohn's disease, they might use a colostomy bag, the understanding about what the access requirements for that person with disability is, that we need to ensure that service and provision is there. So that greater level of awareness is really important. Is that we have a culture and attitude towards how we deal with inclusion at a local level and also as a national level as well. So clubs understand that this is our strategy towards moving the dial on a local level, how we make the facilities more accessible and inclusive. And we have that greater level of understanding as a part of that we see investment, whether it's in time by clubs kind of really focusing their resources towards this service and provision. I think that's another side that we need to kind of do that the disability access officers at the clubs are not the only person that deal with this area, that is owned by the whole club and maybe led by disability access officers and senior managers, that's disseminated across around, and that we see a downturn in results from our annual fan survey as well, that the matchday experiences improve and obviously barriers reduce and the negative experiences reduce as well.
Okay, and final question. If you had to provide 3 important areas of action for providers and fans to bring about equality for disabled sports fans, what would they be? Now, I appreciate that's probably quite hard to answer, but what's your best attempt?
I think I'm going to link it back to the social model of disability. And I think the social model of disability, you're not disabled by your disability, you're disabled by the barriers in society. And there are 3 specific factors within that. So you've got the environmental factors, the attitudinal factors, and the organizational factors. So if we're looking at 3 kind of key areas, it's firstly kind of maybe understanding and owning that access and inclusion isn't down to the individual disabled person to try to overcome. It's a societal goal, objective. And I think firstly, let's own that. Let's do that. As an organization, as a service provider, what must I do to make it inclusive? Now, that's the first initial kind of question, and to kind of understand that. You demonstrate that by delivering those 3 key things. For an environmental factor, what are the physical adaptations that we can do to make this venue more inclusive? Make this experience more inclusive? What do I need to provide to be able to kind of welcome more disabled people in? And have that as a lens that if we're an example, maybe if we're going to have a trophy parade because your team's won it, how are you making that inclusive along the way? If it's a bus route through the city centre of wherever that city may be, then are you providing accessible viewing platforms? That decision-making, disability is at the heart of it from the very beginning. So that's kind of that one thing. The attitudes of fellow fans, of clubs towards disability, is of an inclusive one. And I think understanding how you play a part in driving that inclusive environment, whether it's about questions you ask when you book tickets, or the challenges you're right, is that it's something which is kind of quite a natural process for a disabled person who want to go and watch a game, and it's kind of relatively seamless to kind of to do that. And then I suppose when you look at the organisation side, the policies around that, the policies towards delivering access and inclusion, really has that at the heart of it. At governance level, how are you going to do to steer those policies and the positions on that you check in with it, not because it's a standard process, is that you check in on your policies and think about, is this inclusive? Is this empowering for a disabled person? If I do this action, what does that impact have on a disabled person? And what do I need to do to kind of overturn it? So kind of really wraps up nicely into the social model of disability. And I think that a greater level of understanding and ownership of people and organizations for the social model of disability, that we all have our part to play in creating that inclusive environment.
Excellent. Well, Owain, fantastic to have a chat with you, and I appreciate all the time that you've spent here. I know also just days away, the Unite for Access campaign starts, so I know you're very busy. So thank you ever so much for spending your time with me. The Unite for Access campaign runs from the Saturday 25th of February to Sunday 12th of March. You can follow the campaign via the social media platforms that Level Playing Field have. And also to look out for media coverage of the campaign. Now, best of luck with the campaign. I'll be following it closely and supporting it from afar. And I hope it goes well. Owain, thank you ever so much. And it'd be great to catch up with you soon.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thank you. That's it. That's all we have time for. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Disability Sport Info Show. Stay tuned for another episode. Until then, goodbye. You've been listening to the Disability Sport Info Show, academic insights into disability sport.